Well, rapid economic development in the continent has put an enormous amount of pressure on power grids across the continent. Governments, together with the private sector, are more than ever searching for means to hasten the pace of the integration of renewable energy, more so solar power, to the national grid. Joining us to discuss finance for solar power projects is Jeannot Boussougouth, who is Senior Manager for Energy, Utilities and Infrastructure at Standard Bank. Thank you so much for joining us. I see you nodding your head. I think I got your surname almost right.
Yes, you did.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jeannot. One of the things that you were saying to me, because I was saying to you, well, it doesn't seem like we have as many projects that are taking place when it comes to renewable energy, and you were saying, no, actually, there are quite a few that are happening.
Yes, there are quite a few projects happening, essentially in South Africa, for example, as a result of the implementation of the IPPP scheme, which is a massive program that will allow for the greening of the renewable, or let's say the power generation asset base in South Africa, to the tune of, for example, for PV, 8.4 gigawatt by 2030. So that's quite significant. I mean, within that configuration, I mean, the bank, Standard Bank, for example, has been involved in advising and also arranging some of the major projects that we've seen for within the renewable space, to the tune of like 8 billion rand for BD1 and slightly less than that for BD2.
And I would imagine that, I mean, you would not be funding these projects if it wasn't lucrative and you could see that you were going to get your returns at the end of the day.
Well, the commercial consideration that need to be taken into account by lenders are multiform. You know, they will include the siting, as I said to you earlier, but it will also include the strengths and obligation of the off-taker. In the case of the renewable program in South Africa, the off-taker is the marketing system operator, or SPO, or Eskom, housed within Eskom, and the PPA payment are backed by strong government guarantees, which are important over a 20-year period. And this allows the lending community and the project developers to have confidence in the renewable market in South Africa.
And so that's something that's actually quite interesting. You're talking about this, the backing of the government guarantees. Is that something that Standard Bank, I mean, you do operate in other African countries, that's something that you're seeing in other African countries?
Well, I mean, lenders will typically ask for government guarantees if you have the off-taker being the public utility, for example. And this is standard across the banking community. You will ask for that, and it gives essentially comfort to the lending community in the case of any potential default, for example, from the side of the off-taker. So it's something that we've seen in many other jurisdictions across Africa, not necessarily in the renewable space, but across the various technology, what is called hydro or gas power stations.
And one of the things we are seeing that when it comes to lenders is that lenders are becoming more and more reluctant to finance projects that are not using renewable energy. We've seen the World Bank also kind of pulling back on that and really looking more for renewable energy. Is that a move that Standard Bank's taking?
Well, I mean, we are looking at essentially supporting renewable energy projects, but we are also looking at supporting hydropower station, for example. I mean, South Africa is introducing a small hydropower scheme, for example, and Standard Bank is expected to play a significant role in this. So we are looking at that, and while helping green the South African market is important, you know, with the Kyoto Protocol obligation of the various signatories, etc. So the bank will always be looking at supporting this kind of, you know, a scheme that will allow for, you know, the reduction of green gas emissions.
I want to talk a little bit about private companies, because you've talking about public enterprises, for instance. But when it comes to the private sector and how much they're doing just in terms of this space, because that also has been a debate that's been taking place of, you know, are private companies allowed to play in this space? How much regulation is there? How much interest are you seeing from private companies wanting to play in this space?
Well, the renewable program in South Africa is essentially driven by the private sector, in the sense that the private sector are essentially the project developers. They are the project developers. So projects are essentially driven from the private sector, with the off-taker being the public utility, Eskom, in the country. So the majority of the projects that we've seen so far are projects that are being developed by private companies, and it is expected to continue going forward, because the market essentially is capable of absorbing the velocity of deals that could happen here. But it's also something that we've seen in countries that have decided to implement renewable feed-in tariff, for example, Kenya. I mean, as far as I know, across Africa, we've got the Northern African region, which has an history of implementing renewable projects, as well as Nigeria and Ghana, which are looking at tapping into the renewable space. So overall, the private sector is clearly playing a key role, as well as the banking community in funding and arranging some of these projects.
Let's talk about some of the deals that you are seeing. You say it seems as though there's a lot of work that's taking place. When can we probably see the shift? And I don't know if you'd be able to speak to that. See the shift from where we're getting our primary source of energy now to moving more towards renewable energy.
I think the shift needs to be done on a sequential manner. South Africa is, like I said earlier, is planning to greening its economy over the next 20 years. 42% of the asset base will be, or renewable will account for 42% of South Africa's generation asset base, and that's quite important. But it has to be done on a phased basis, really, because the banking community and as well as National Treasury, which is backing the renewable project in South Africa / government, we need to have or to see the first wave of deals close, etc., and then we will keep moving forward in terms of continuing the expansion of the renewable project, and that is happening across Africa. Really.
What do you foresee or experience to be some of the challenges that are probably, that we could be moving faster if it wasn't for this?
Well, from a project developer perspective, maybe the key challenge often reside within the ability of the project developers to provide the equity portion of the project. And this is a key element because depending on how you structure your deal and whether or not you are willing to bring in additional equity partners, you may have a significant equity risk exposure to the project. And sometimes, some project developers may not necessarily have the necessary equity portion, to make the project become bankable.
I have to ask you very quickly, South Africa, does it have that?
South Africa is pretty well under in terms of coal, but at the same time, we are looking at renewables as a key complementary feedstock to the existing asset base, which is essentially coal-based.
Thank you so much for joining us. That was Jeannot Boussougouth, and I got that surname right again. Thank you so much for coming. He's Senior Manager for Energy, Utilities and Infrastructure at Standard Bank, and he was talking to us about investors' outlook on the solar energy sector.